Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's Week 2 Talking Points show in association with our partner QuinnBet. Well, this was a weekend where we learned the truth of the famous Hollywood writer William Goldman's great line, nobody knows anything. The Cowboys, Lions and 49ers all looked like the class of the NFC last weekend. Each of them were dealt humbling losses on Sunday. The Packers upset the Colts despite the absence of Jordan Love. The Chiefs squeaked past yet another key AFC rival as Harrison Butker gave them a walk-off win against the Bengals, and the Raiders, 9-point underdogs at the weekend, dropped the Ravens, who were many people's Super Bowl pick at the start of the season, to 0-2, already looking in a little bit of difficulty in the AFC North before it even gets started. But we begin tonight with some relatively fresh news off the presses because Shane, Bryce Young has been benched by Dave Canales and the Carolina Panthers. He lasted just 2 games into the season. Dave Canales brought in after working wonders with Baker Mayfield and the Bucs last season. He was the guy who was going to get the most out of Bryce Young or die trying, and it appears like he's jacked it in after just 2 games.
Yeah, it's interesting how early in the season this decision has been made, but when you see that the quality of play from Bryce Young, and I know it's not the problems around the Panthers are far more than just the quarterback, but it just seems like he was kind of in autopilot mode for many of the passes. There's a couple of times he takes a snap and throws it without even looking, and the gap between where the ball is going, where the receiver is going, is probably about a yard or two. There's no connection, there's no belief, there's no, I guess, thought process in what a quarterback should be doing to push things down the field. And it's not as if the Panthers have lost but still had flashes of brilliance. They've lost 2 games with flashes of absolutely nothing. And look, Dave Canales knows himself that he's on a hot seat. Just because he's only in the door doesn't mean he can't be kicked out again. He has to show some form of action and doing something. And bringing Andy Dalton to play as quarterback is one way of doing that. And I'm not quite sure whether this really is the solution to all of Carolina's problems. We're yet to see, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And it's just clear that Bryce Young has.
Kieran, I think you can go. Sorry, Shane, we were losing you there, so I was just going to move on to Kieran briefly. Kieran, I think we can go either one of 2 ways on this Dave Canales decision. Either, as Shane was just saying there, he sees sense and realizes that you can't just keep repeating the same thing and expecting a different result. Or you could say, well, hang on a minute, weren't you the guy who was brought in to rehabilitate this quarterback? Andy Dalton's hardly going to be the answer. Now, I know you have your own views on Bryce Young, but one thing in the pro Dave Canales camp, or pro this decision, I would suggest, is the PFF have the Carolina Panthers O-line graded as the 5th best in terms of pass block rate in the admittedly only just underway season after 2 games. They were 27th over the season last year, so they clearly have made improvements there. Granted, he doesn't have a Marvin Harrison or a Malik Neighbors, a shiny new receiver to throw the ball to this season, but it's not like he has nothing around him.
Well, it's not like he has nothing around him, but saying that, he doesn't have a lot around him. Chuba Hubbard and Adam Thielen are really your star players, but it all comes back to Young. How many times have we said he's not built as a quarterback? And it's come down to job security for Canales. He can't afford to keep putting them out there. They've already shipped a huge amount of points in the first 2 weeks, and they don't look like being competitive at all. So they've got to make a change somewhere. And whatever spark Canales is going to have to bring in, then something's going to have to happen soon, because it could get to the stage where by November 10th in Germany, you have an 0-9 Giants team playing an 0-9 Panthers team, and the NFL don't want that. The Giants don't want that. The Panthers don't want that. So he's got to make a decision real quick, and he's made it. And credit to him. But it's the part of you feels a little bit bad for and a little bit sorry for Bryce Young. He's put in a position that he's clearly not ready for. I've spoken a lot about his size and his kind of physical presence, and even his vocal presence. He doesn't have those attributes that an NFL quarterback has. And he kind of limped through last year because it was, his first year, but it catches up real quick. And at this stage, the Panthers have to move real quick, and they've got to stop the bleeding, because at this stage, I mean, it's a horror show in Carolina. Now, you saw a couple of shots of the crowd. It's going to be even worse as the season goes on unless they make a change. So he had to act. This may be it for Young. I mean, it might be too soon, but that's his days as a starter are probably numbered, and he's probably destined for a second or third string life as a quarterback in the league.
Brian, you'd have to have some sympathy with Bryce Young all the same. And I know we were saying in our chat across the day here in the WhatsApp chat that, look, he does only have himself to blame to some degree, because some of the throws have just been awful. As Shane was saying earlier, he just looks like he's chucking the ball at times without any thought or any proper process going into it. He had one jump pass over his O-line yesterday that just went straight into the ground. It just, ridiculously bad decision making and execution at times from him. But 18 games before you get effectively discarded. And as Kieran was saying, once something like this happens, it's a long way back. And we've seen it happen to other quarterbacks in the past. We're going to get to a story of a couple of quarterbacks who are on the road to rehabilitation, including Mr. Sam Darnold, after the first 2 games that he's had at the Minnesota Vikings. But it's not an awful lot of time to prove yourself either, particularly when this team traded away Christian McCaffrey, they traded away DJ Moore, they've obviously got rid of Brian Burns in the offseason, so they really haven't put a huge amount around Bryce Young to help him. As Kieran was saying, they don't have nothing, but they don't have an awful lot either. And as we know, David Tepper, the general manager owner, is not the most patient man in the world. If you were running a keys cut while you wait place, you wouldn't want David Tepper waiting on the counter at you. He'd be tapping the fingers on the counter and staring into the back of your skull. And Canales is thinking, if I don't make this decision quickly, I'll be looking for another job.
Yeah, I wonder how much of the pressure has come down from Dan Morgan, who's the GM, vice president, whatever the phrase is these days for his role. But ultimately, there's no loyalty there because they weren't involved in the selection of Bryce Young. I'd love to know what the owner thinks of all this, because cast your mind back to when the process of the draft was going on and everybody felt like CJ Stroud was going to be the first pick, and by all accounts that's who they wanted. And then obviously the owner got involved and put the hammer down that they were to select Bryce Young, if you believe all the reports at the time, and didn't really fit the makeup of the coach at the time in terms of what he usually looks for in a quarterback. So it didn't really make sense. It's difficult. Like we say they don't have a lot around them, but
you'd think there to that point, Brian, and sorry to cut across you, that then Canales' mind is probably made up going in, and what he's been doing over the last 2 games is effectively saying to himself, let me give Bryce Young enough rope to hang himself. I'll give him 2 games so nobody can say that I didn't try, but at the end of the day, this is not my quarterback and I'm not wedded to him, to your point.
Well, there's also the factor, I would say, that they did try to put players around that would help this offense. Brooks, the running back, was arguably the best running back in the draft. I know Kieran at times felt maybe he would end up at the Cowboys. He goes in the second round. The Panthers moved up to get him. They bring in Leggett. They move up the 4th round to get Leggett, and he gets an injury in camp. So it hasn't worked out and hasn't involved in the manner in which you've got 2 explosive players coming in who haven't been involved essentially, and it doesn't look like they're going to be really involved for quite some time. That doesn't really help the situation, but he looks like a quarterback now that's completely frazzled and totally out of sorts. He's running around with his hair on fire. Offensive line is not there to protect him. Yeah, I know some of the throws are very off-putting. We saw last week, but when you're playing consistently under pressure, is it any surprise that these throws are happening? And he's trying to make a play, and he's overplaying it in the sense of, he's feeling the pressure. He's trying to make the play because ultimately he knows his team are down by big scores, and the plays have to happen. But it's an unfortunate situation, and Kieran's right. I think Shane just as well. It's only a matter of time now before they move on in terms of he's not even with the Panthers anymore. And where's he going to end up? It feels like a Mac Jones type of scenario, unfortunately, where he ends up in a backup somewhere, and ultimately that's all it'll be from going forward. He's playing because of so much talent, and when you think about how much capital they gave up to your Bears to come up, I mean, if they had selected CJ Stroud, where are the Panthers now? 12 months on, people would be saying it was a masterful decision to move up and get CJ Stroud. The Texans get him in the second pick, and sometimes not winning that game at the end, get the first pick, it changes everything. It's amazing how a dynamic of a team and the organization can change by one selection.
Well, I tell you, if he doesn't end up, Brian, at your beloved Giants, he may end up at either the Vikings or the Packers, because I say Matt LaFleur and Kevin O'Connell seem to be competing between themselves as to who can rehabilitate the most broken quarterback the most quickly, given what we've seen with Sam Darnold and Malik Willis over the past weekend. But we move on from the Panthers. We'd stay in the NFC South, though, because, Shane, NFC South teams are not playing around here. The Panthers are obviously going to be dwelling in the basement, it looks like, for the next season again. But the Saints, who weren't at all fancied in the NFC South, which we kind of derided as being a slow bicycle race again this year, is looking far from that, given what the Saints, and we'll get to the Bucs as well, have done, particularly over this weekend against the Cowboys. Absolutely dominant win. 6 straight touchdown drives to start the game. And this was a run that the Saints have put together of 15 straight scoring drives. They scored on each of their first 15 possessions of the 2024-2025 season. Derek Carr looks like a man reborn. They got weapons everywhere you look. Alvin Kamara is playing out of his skin. It's all on the uptick in New Orleans.
It is all on the uptick in New Orleans, and to quote Coach Brent Key, who got that great win in Dublin, run the ball. That's exactly what the Saints have been doing, and they've been doing to great effect and with a level of great efficiency. Their scoring efficiency has been reminiscent of the great teams of the past, but they haven't done it by overusing or forcing too much from a quarterback, which they know isn't one of the best in the league. They know when to use Derek Carr to the best effect, and know when to keep it on the ground with Alvin Kamara to the best effect. And it's quite simple. And I suppose we'll get onto the Cowboys in a second and the questions that they have to ask themselves on defense. But fair play to the Saints for just showing what good game planning looks like. And I think a lot of teams in the league who have talent, probably even a greater soccer talent than the Saints do, can learn a lot from the Saints by just what proper game planning can do in terms of getting the most out of the pieces you have. And it's a very simple concept, but it's something that New Orleans have done exceptionally well. Being able to score 21 points in the second quarter and 14 in the first is just being able to take all of your chances as quickly as possible. And look, I think the Saints maybe flew a little bit under our radars because last year we weren't paying a whole lot of attention to them. They built into the season last year, but we weren't really paying, weren't really watching them closely because that division was pretty much the Buccaneers as the season went on. But they're really putting up a challenge very early in the season. The fact that they've gone into Dallas, a place which is generally a difficult place to go in the regular season, and able to punch in all these scores. I remember Derek Carr only threw the ball 16 times. He connected on 11 of them, didn't make too many mistakes. And when he passed it forwards. Where I'm going to talk about this later on, that a lot of this quarterbacking in the league right now seems to love these sideways passes. Derek Carr is trying to.
All he was doing last year, Shane, was hitting checkdowns, like checking it down to whoever was available. And every time he threw it long, he threw it way off target. I mean, yesterday we saw him hit a 70-yard touchdown pass to Rashid Shaheed. But it traveled 54.5 yards in the air. Like, he was slinging that football.
Yeah, and it is a rehabilitation of his ability to throw it downfield. And I think there's a mindset in New Orleans that isn't overly burdened by this analytics-driven approach to offense that I think is really hampering a lot of offenses and is making a lot of quarterbacks make decisions which are too safe. I think this is taking football back a step, taking football back to basics, run the ball well, have a good offensive line, which is offensive line, I think, is something that we underrated. We were talking in the draft show that was an area which the Saints needed to improve on. It's something they have done and it's played exceptionally well. And when Derek Carr has thrown it, he's been a little bit more ambitious and he's getting it right, as you were kind of referring to there, Connor. So fair play to them. I don't know how far this will go in later on to the season, but it's definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Kieran, the image that's burned into my mind from a Cowboys perspective in that game is Dak Prescott having to put in a tackle to stop Paulson Adebo returning the ball for a pick six, having just been intercepted by the self-same Saints defensive back. That is not the way the Cowboys would have imagined this one going. It's not the way Cowboys fans would have imagined it. It's certainly not the way Jerry Jones would have seen it. Is this just a burn the tape game, or are there more fundamental problems with the Cowboys that we didn't maybe see last weekend when they went to an underperforming Browns team?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the way the Cowboys are right now. I mean, nobody saw this coming, but then again, nobody's surprised that it happened because we saw an almost identical game in the playoffs where they were torn apart by Jordan Love and the Packers. I'm still in that mindset where it's week 2 and we're still essentially just feeling other teams out in the NFL. I think it's an anomaly. I think it's one of those. But now, when I say that as an anomaly that the Cowboys got destroyed, I'm not looking away from the fact that McCarthy's under a huge amount of pressure after this, because that was another home game, another destruction, another game that was over by halftime. And I mean, like you said, that pass from Derek Carr to Rashid Shaheed was absolutely beautiful. Watching it in real time, you fully expect it to be picked off because that's Derek Carr's MO. But that was an amazing throw and an amazing catch, and that just underlined the confidence that the Saints are running with right now. But the Cowboys, I feel like they're still, putting a lot of things in motion. But the thing that kind of surprised me the most was, well, first off, was the Saints O-line. which was playing out of their skin. I mean, they got Talise Fuaga, the draft pick, and also a guy called Lucas Patrick, who was playing right guard, who's just solidified that O-line. And they were able to, you saw the room that Kamara got, but where was the Cowboys defense yesterday? They looked slow, they looked sluggish, they were not at any of the plays.
Like a couple of those Kamara touchdown runs, he goes in completely untouched. Like, he's just running by players. It's not as if, to your point, players weren't in a position to tackle it. I mean, the blocking was obviously good, but I mean, people just not laying it. This is the same defense that played with its hair on fire last week. We were talking about 6 sacks, 17 tackles for loss. They looked like they were absolutely just taking the Browns apart. We didn't see the same fight, never mind whatever Zimmer was looking at or not looking at schematically. It just, the energy wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't there, and it's odd because you're at home in a full house, and Brady and Mike Tyson were on the sideline at the start of the game, and all the vibes were there for Jerry, and it just got south real quick. One other thing to realize, Clint Kubiak. It was the Clint Kubiak Mike Zimmer battle. I mean, Kubiak's got experience with the Niners, with the Broncos. His dad, Gary Kubiak, is a former head coach, so he's another one of these kind of coaching tree guys to keep an eye on for maybe a head coach job down the line. But he had a great offensive scheme yesterday. And whether it's the Cowboys being asleep at home or him just doing what they needed to do, which was give Derek Carr enough kind of confidence to make a couple of plays, no picks, no turnovers. If you feel like it's open, throw it down like he did with Shaheed. He didn't do anything crazy, but they ran the hell out of the ball, which maybe surprised the Cowboys a little bit. But long story short, I think that's an anomaly for the Cowboys. I think they'll be back to normal next week, but they're capable of this. I mean, they could go out next week and put 50 points up on somebody, but definitely burning the tape. And Jerry will be having some serious chats with Mr. McCarthy this week. I'll tell you that.
Brian, a broader point about the action we've seen over the past couple of weeks. Both Shane and Kieran have touched on it there, where Shane rightly quoted Brent Key, the Georgia Tech coach, saying run the ball. One of the things we haven't seen over the past 2 weeks is an awful lot of passing touchdowns. We're way down in terms of what the run rate has been over the past 5, 6, 7 seasons. It's virtually half what it was in the peak year, I think, which was 2019. I don't think we're even at 100 passing touchdowns so far over 2 games, which is very low. But we have seen an awful lot, particularly over the last weekend, an awful lot of teams pounding the rock. We saw the Packers, obviously by necessity, because they were playing with Malik Wallace, a quarterback. They put up 260 something rushing yards in the first half against the Colts at the weekend. We saw what the Saints that the lads have been talking about did there. We've seen the Chargers turn into a run first team and having great success with that. Suddenly 3 yards in a cloud of dust is back in fashion.
Absolutely, Connor, and that's, I suppose, teams have acknowledged this is the most productive way offensively at the moment, with the exception of Dan Campbell, I might throw in, because Dan Campbell's offense was running at a rate of 5.1 yards per carry yesterday, but yet he found a way to allow Goff to throw the ball 53 times in the game, as opposed to doing what was working for your team, run the ball. But that is the narrative right now over the course of 2 weeks. I was reading some articles today. There's no deep balls. We've seen very few, even never mind the touchdowns. There's very few deep ball great plays in which we can relate to, maybe with the exception of Jefferson going off with the 99-yard touchdown, which I imagine we'll come to shortly. But certainly a different model so far, and for people who like to watch that grinding type of offense where you run the ball effectively, it's what they want to see. But we're still waiting for those magical plays, but we're not seeing a lot of them so far. Connor, maybe Jefferson is the first of many to come.
Kieran, we've been talking up the Saints and what they've been doing, but they're being matched stride for stride by the Bucs. We touched on Dave Canales at the Panthers a couple of minutes ago and talking about, at the start of the season, people were saying, well, will Baker be the same now without his beloved OC, the man who helped rehabilitate his career? Baker not only looks the same, he looks even better. I mean, and this is a game in which, let's not forget, Aiden Hutchinson went after him. Like, Aiden Hutchinson had 5 sacks on Baker. Baker was getting beat up, but he just kept picking himself back off the turf, kept playing his game. He picked up a couple of gutsy first downs for one of their scoring drives where he needed to take off and scramble, and again made a couple of great throws to keep the Bucs in that game and ultimately to triumph in a really big spot against the Lions, gaining a measure of revenge for last year's playoff loss.
Yeah, another quite a surprising result. But then again, are we really surprised that the Buccaneers were able to go in and get the win? I mean, that's a good team, and Baker's a different guy this year. He's playing with a lot of swagger, a lot of confidence, throwing the ball around a lot, even getting beaten up. He's getting mauled by Hutchinson. He's still getting up, and he's not letting it affect him adversely. A lot of this is, again, and I don't want to bring up the Dan Campbell stuff, but we all saw that play right before the half where he misjudged the timeouts and we had the running clock. That's a huge error, and it's eating him up, because the more these things happen, especially in key situations, the more that's going to prey on his mind. And he had that reputation last year where we all know about the field goals and the touchdowns, but that was a huge error yesterday, and that was a field goal.
Yeah, but he got it out of his system by calling a fake punt inside the own 20.
I guess,
and they got the first down. That was an amazing play.
That was an amazing play, but that's eating him up. And he was talking about it post game too. I mean, that was a nailed on field goal right before the half. But he
was really crying about it. I love me some emotional Dan Campbell.
Yeah,
I have to say,
I mean,
he's a heart in the sleeve kind of guy, and he genuinely was upset about that.
He surely is. But all the quotes are, I put the team in the position to win, but I failed them with my coaching. So that's going to hurt for him. Again, it's more about the Buccaneers and what they did, to go into Detroit and put a performance like that. Nothing flashy. I mean, Baker did. No one's really putting up 200, 300 yards. It's 12 for 19, 185 with a touchdown and an interception. Not magical figures, but it's almost like it's reverted to the norm right now. Every quarterback is in between that 150, 190 yards game right now. But again, he did enough, and he went into a cauldron, and he got batted around by Hutchinson, but he still stood up and he made plays, and they got the win. And great credit to them, because, who saw the Saints and the Bucks kind of competing at the top of the NFC South other than me? But it's a great storyline so far. And Baker, for all the stuff he's been through, I mean, he was, only a couple of years ago, he was with Sam Darnold at Carolina, and where was his career going there? Not very far, until he managed to turn it around. So a lot of time for Baker. He's really got himself in a good position to be a really strong quarterback in the league. So good for him.
And Shane, it's not only that Kieran has a lot of time for Baker. Bill Belichick, as we know, has a lot of time for him, was talking him up during the week, even before this game. But it wasn't just the Baker, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans show either, to be fair. That Bucs defense came in missing basically half its secondary, including their Pro Bowl safety, Antoine Winfield Jr. They put huge pressure on Jared Goff, and we saw some of the reasons maybe we've forgotten about over the last couple of years as he's been, again, dealt with so well in that Ben Johnson scheme. But we saw some of bad Jared, and when that rears its head, it can put the Lions in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, and situation being the key word, and I'll get onto that. I'll just go back to your Bill Belichick comment first. It's very nice to see that Bill Belichick is quite happy with Tom Brady's replacing the quarterback. Obviously, this time in Tampa Bay to New England, but that's an aside. I think situation is a key factor here for Detroit, because if you look at the stats, if you look at the way that this game played out over the course of it, it was a classic case of Dan Campbell football going wrong, because when it goes right, they managed to pull out these emotionally driven victories over sort of burgeoning rivals like they did against the Rams last week. But when it goes wrong in spectacular proportions against a defense which, to your point, Connor, what displayed an excellent mentality or excellent display of bend but don't break mentality. They weren't overly concerned about getting picks. They weren't overly concerned about getting massive tackles behind the line. They just knew to swat down passes, don't give up yards after catch, contain the run, and just keep some sort of lid on whatever Detroit can do in situations and not worry about the statistics, because the stats showed this game being completely different than the scoreline, because the Lions had roughly twice as many first downs, twice as many passing yards, twice as many total yards, and twice as many total plays. Jared Goff had to throw the ball 55 times, as Brian alluded to there. The run game was effective, but not effective in the right moments. And as Kieran was talking about earlier, that kind of mess up for the kick. And look, I don't want to knock down on Dan Campbell too much, but it just shows to me that it's very emotionally charged, and they have the umpteenth capacity to build up the scoreboard. But when it just comes to those crucial moments, they're lacking the composure. And I thought Jared Goff, is particularly in the fourth quarter when he needed to pull out a win, the quality of the passing wasn't there. They were very easily slotted away by the defenders. I don't really think he had that kind of the kind of accuracy that we saw against the Rams a week previous. And a 4-point defeat is what a Buccaneers team who manage situations better, came away with, despite the fact that the Lions were clearly, statistically and in terms of talent and in terms of ability to gain yards, the better team. But the fact is, unless you can punch it in the end zone when you need to, when the situation arrives, it doesn't matter. Scoreline is the only stat that counts.
I'll say one thing though: the emergence of Jameson Williams as a genuine WR2 there is really going to help them as the season progresses. If his development continues, that's something that I people have been talking him up for the last couple of years. Obviously, he's had injury troubles, didn't have the greatest rookie year, but he's a guy who has huge talent. He's huge speed, as we know. He can be a real difference maker. They were talking about him as Tyreek 2.0 a couple of years ago, and you're seeing flashes of that. I think that's going to be a very interesting one to watch as the season goes, because it's not all on Amon-Ra anymore, and that could be very valuable as the season progresses. We'll move on though, Brian, because we've got the Vikings to talk about. What a performance from Sam Darnold over the weekend. They now moved to 2-0. You mentioned that gorgeous touchdown pass to Justin Jefferson. A couple of things to talk about there. Firstly, it's a great pass. Secondly, it's an incredible finish from Jefferson, who still has a hell of a lot of work to do, has to turn on the brakes, has to throw in a couple of moves before he gets to the end zone and uncorks the gritty. The other thing that's been doing the rounds on X, if anybody's seen the clip, somebody was pointing out the highlight play from the back judge. The ref does an unbelievable job. Firstly, keeping up with the play, because you got some I think he actually ran faster than one of the San Francisco defensive backs at one point. He has to get out of Jefferson's way. He has to put on a couple of moves himself. Unbelievable display of fitness and conditioning from the refs. But sorry, I don't want to distract from the action. I don't want to take away from a moment where, and there haven't been too many where we've got to celebrate Sam Darnold, but this was a landing spot for JJ McCarthy, the rookie quarterback who's now injured. The people said this is the perfect place to go because Kevin O'Connell will get the most out of you, and you've got Justin Jefferson to throw to, and you got TJ Hawkinson, and you got all those other weapons. You're going to be well set there, and you got a Brian Flores defense that can step in when times are tough, and that's exactly what happened again yesterday against the Niners.
Yeah, and that particular play, let's not forget the fourth down play just prior to that, because the 49ers went for it on fourth down on the 1 yard line, didn't get in, and then literally the next play, you got your 99-yard touchdown, which, as you touched on, fantastic piece of action for all the fans watching. But it's such a huge moment in the game. It's such a momentum swing, and I don't think the 49ers never really recovered. I know they kept it in the game, and then they were kind of fortunate as well. Aaron Jones has been a lovely addition. Like, I think Noel called it out in our NFC North preview. He felt he was one of the kind of underestimated signings of the offseason for him to go from Green Bay and stay in the division, understands the nature of playing against teams in the division, and he's been so effective in the first 2 weeks. But the Niners hung around because of big plays as well in terms of that. They knocked the ball out when Aaron Jones is going into the end zone. But what's telling for me with the Niners is, and we've seen it a little bit last year, when they're playing from behind and Purdy's under pressure and they're getting picked off, they're not the same team. They're so strong and so effective when they're playing from in front and allows the defense to go after the quarterback. But when they're struggling, they're playing from behind, they don't seem to have the same kind of... We spoke last year about Kyle Shanahan. Do you remember there was a stat last year around how many games were he 7 points down going into the second half, and the return ratio in terms of wins? It was one yesterday that it never looked like they were going to get over the line. I know it was closer in the end than probably it's saying, but huge win for the Vikings, 2-0. Nobody really thought that we all thought they'd be struggling. I know Shane called them out as his dark horse within the division a few weeks back, but didn't see it coming. Huge win, even in the dressing room after Sam Darnold coming in, effing and blind about the 49ers released them. Like, hold your horses there, love. You were the backup quarterback. There was a reason for that as well. So I think over the course of the season, we might see him transition back to what we're used to seeing.
And shout out as well to the Irish faithful who had their watch party and buskers on the ball over the weekend. Unfortunately, didn't get the result that they wanted, but hopefully next time out, when you guys gather, you'll have better news. One thing that they won't have relished hearing either, Kieran, is the Christian McCaffrey injury news, which doesn't seem to be getting any better. He's on IR, as we know, so guaranteed to be out for 4 weeks. We saw last season in that stretch of games that they lost that Christian McCaffrey in that offense makes a massive difference. Everybody looks better once he's there, and we're seeing it again.
Yeah, I mean, it all hums when he's there. Ayuk hums, and so does Samuel. It just didn't get going for the Niners yesterday. I mean, 3 fumbles on offense. They went for fourth down a number of times and weren't able to get it going. Nothing happened really. Nobody got into a flow of anything. Kittle went out injured after that early touchdown. But again, it's the Niners. It's the Vikings for me. It's the story of that defense. I mean, the third down, the Niners third down, or the Vikings third down defense, just Niners couldn't do anything. It's Van Ginkel, it's Byron Murphy, it's Harrison Smith, it's Stephon Gilmore, and they swarmed. They didn't let them get into any kind of rhythm, any kind of flow. And again, what we've talked about with the Niners, when they go behind, it's tough for them to get into any kind of rhythm, and that's how it was yesterday. But again, credit to Minnesota. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody saw Sam Darnold doing what he's doing. I still think it's pretty early in the season for him to be getting all those plaudits. It's still September. We got to pump the brakes a little bit, but nice little victory for them. Concerns about Jefferson. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. I know they were doing a couple of tests after the game, so we'll see what happens with that. But without McCaffrey, it's a different team, obviously, and they're going to have to tread water. Saying all that, though, Mason did have he had a nice little tidy game, 110 yards. I think he had 20 touches on 100 yards, which is not a bad return, but it's not the same team without McCaffrey. But
yeah, and you're right to call out Flores and the Vikings defense as well. The highest pressure rate I think that Brock Purdy's ever faced, and considering that they gave up arguably their best pass rusher, Daniil Hunter, in that trade with the Texans, Brian Flores just knows how to shuffle the pack and get the most out of what he's got at his disposal. We'll take a break there and we'll come back with the second segment of our Week 2 talking points right after. This is the second segment of our Week 2 talking points on the Irish NFL show. That break there brought to you by our partner Buskers on the Ball. Shane, if you were watching Red Zone and Buskers on the Ball over the weekend, there were frequent cuts to the Arizona Cardinals game because Marvin Harrison Jr. is exactly as advertised. 131 yards, 2 touchdowns in the first quarter against the Rams. He is absolutely unbelievable.
What really impressed me about the 2 touchdowns that he got against the Rams is not the fact that he was able to get free, not the fact that he was able to I guess catch the ball, the fact that he knew where Kyler wanted him to be. I think that the way that both of those routes actually ran out, there was a little bit of improvisation once he got into the end zone and being able to find himself to be in the right place at the right time for Kyler to be, and that is a good sign you want for your team, especially considering Kyler's tendency to run outside the pocket, to scramble and look around for the right kind of space. That's the wide receiver that you want with him. And look, it's a great sign for a Cardinals team to put up so many points against a Rams team who I think are really, this was a game where they're really feeling the absence of the defensive parts that they lost in the offseason, the absence of Puka Nacua and a couple of offensive linemen, which they have dropped out as well. It's one of the reasons why I felt the Cardinals would win this, although I did think that it would be kept to a much closer game. My problem in the long term now is I'm not quite sure how much we can fully expect Kyler Murray to turn his chaotic style of quarterbacking into a consistent run of victories. We saw that he managed to have a good start against the Buffalo Bills last year, but the even more chaotic Josh Allen managed to pull things out of the bag. It really worked this time because obviously he was told by somebody to throw to Marvin Harrison Jr., which he didn't do in the first week against the Bills.
You're referencing his post-game interview last week, which Noel rightly called out, saying when Kyler Murray was asked about should they not have done more to get the ball to their superstar rookie wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr., said that's not my job.
Well, it was definitely. I definitely feel like someone must have chewed him out, or at very least in the first kind of meeting that the offense had on Monday or Tuesday, were like, okay.
Well, maybe they have a much more inclusive and enabling work environment, Shane, and somebody just pointed out to him gently that, maybe just throw the ball to this guy. Just suggested.
Yeah. It might have been just a memo on Microsoft Teams. I'm not quite sure. Either way, it worked, and the fact that they came out and did it so much in the first quarter, I think, was a statement of intent of what they're going to do the rest of the season. They're playing in front of their home fans. It's a very different atmosphere than going up to Buffalo. And look, I liked a lot of what I saw from Kyler yesterday. It's once again classic highlight reel level. I just hope that it doesn't end up turning into an over reliance and throwing on having to throw 50 plus yards and making him more susceptible to being picked off by a team with stronger cornerbacks. But that said, his clear I guess early game cohesiveness and the way that he's able to work with Marvin Harrison Jr. is a very good sign going forward for the Cardinals. And I think they can really cause a few upsets and at least show themselves to be particularly strong in the run for an NFC wildcard spot. You know, it's very early in the season where there's a lot of games to come up, and I'm sure the Cardinals defense is a side which I know they only held the Rams to 10 points today, but that's a side that I'll be worried about in the long term. But let's look, a very good game from the Cards. The Rams, I think, didn't really turn up. You know, if you're a good teams are allowed to have bad days, and this is one of them.
Brian, Shane described it as chaotic, but Kyler Murray's chaos was resulted in a perfect passer rating. He was 100% on throws of 20 yards or more. Like, the deep ball is there. He's running around, you know, doing that sandlot football thing, even when he's under pressure. And he's got some guys to throw to. It's not just Marvin Harrison Jr. Dortch is playing out of his skin. Trey Burton's playing out of his skin. All these guys just look like they're up for it. And the Jonathan Gannon year 2 Arizona Cardinals are spicy.
This isn't chaotic. This is Kyler Murray. Like, we see Kyler Murray all the time. This is the way he plays the game. It's the nature of the quarterback in which he's selected as the first pick. He's the road runner type quarterback. He's going to do it all and try to do it all, and sometimes he do too much. But I think the game plan yesterday in particular was they recognized there was an opportunity to exploit a Lions defense, which got exploited for large parts of the game against the Lions last week on Sunday Night Football, and looked like they may get over the line. But they came out, and all this conversation throughout the week about, you know, the people are kind of down on Murray because of the comments. I understood where he was coming from. He goes, I think he was referring to more the offensive style and the play calling as opposed to me giving him the ball. I'm going to do what I'm told to do, essentially, and I'm going to deliver the play, which is called into the huddle. But there obviously was a game plan yesterday that Harrison's going to be the key stakeholder in everything that we do offensively in the first half. And what I would say is they've got a nice complementary game when they do kind of methodically work on it, which is James Conner in the backfield. He's, again, another running back which doesn't get the credit in the league he deserves. He's a real bulldozer, and, you know, we saw what he was in Pittsburgh, but he's so effective when he gets going. But for this Rams team, I didn't select them to go to the playoffs this year. I felt he'd struggle, and they've got the 14 winners this weekend. I mean, they got to get over the slide here before this gets away from them quickly. 0-3. There's other teams that are talking about an 0-3 start and the season's over already. Maybe the Rams aren't in that bucket, but it's going to get worse if they don't get players back and they start continue to lose games. Yesterday was a really bad game for Sean McVay.
Kieran, for those of us watching the live stream here on YouTube, Twitch, or X, we won't have failed to notice your vibrant Florida football T-shirt, which is reminding me to ask you about Jags Watch. It's been rough in Jacksonville. Doug Peterson is getting an awful time from the Jacksonville media, and not necessarily without just cause.
Yeah, these are dark days in North Florida football. The Jags are 0-2. They're 1-7 in the last 8 games. The Gators are 0-2. Florida State's 0-3. These are bad times, but particularly with the Jags, this is a really somber. I think the weather was reflective of the mood. It was soggy and it was humid and overcast in Jacksonville here yesterday. And this is a team that is in a lot of trouble. The hot seat is well and truly burning right now for not just Doug Peterson, but for offensive coordinator Press Taylor. Jags fans they're going back into that mire of how it was a couple of years ago under Urban and how bad they were then. And it's real bad. I mean, Lawrence has the same issues, the fumbling, wasn't able to get anything going. I think he had 16 yards of offense before the half. The punter for the Browns had more yards than he did. And
it's not like the Browns were running a masterclass there either. They've 13 penalties. Deshaun Watson's barely managing 6 yards per attempt. It's I was going to say it's functional at best. It's not even functional for most of the time in Cleveland, and they still managed to win.
Yeah, and Cleveland had 13 penalties for over 100 yards, and they still won. How many teams have 13 penalties and still get the win? Just all around terrible. I mean, it started terrible when Ingram was out with a hamstring injury at the start. And, it's real bad for a team that I think most of us thought was going to be competing with the Texans. And now they're in a massive hole. They're 0-2 while the Texans are 2-0. And these are, it's a bad time right now for Jaguars fans, and they'll have to start getting something together real soon because London's on the horizon, and they've got to get both wins out of those 2 games if they've any chance against Houston. So rough times in North Florida right now.
Brian, you were watching that Cleveland-Jacksonville game as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that today's conversation is about the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and Trevor Lawrence, 14 completions in the entirety of the game. But I thought the crucial piece of the game was when they looked to getting a little bit of momentum back with 7:32 left on the clock, they allowed the Browns to go for 6 minutes with a drive. Nothing came in the drive, but they took 6 minutes off the clock. This is where you need your defense to step up. They couldn't do that either. Put the Browns in a position. Okay, the Jags had that opportunity at the end, but to take 6 minutes off the clock and essentially kill the game, I mean, that's ineffective defense. You gotta step up. Your offense is struggling. Sometimes your defense gets you out of a hole and wins you a game. There's just no complimentary football on either side right now. And they're going to Buffalo next Monday, who coming off a win, 10 days rest after Miami. A comprehensive win on a Thursday night in Miami.
Buffalo and Houston in their next 2 games, right? You could be 0-4 before you know where you are.
Yeah, and then you go to London, and I think there's one prior to that, but then London with the Bears, they got the Patriots. I mean,
0-5, chalk that one down.
Yeah, who would have thought that? Against the Bears team going to Tottenham, we'll see. But look, it just we've been here before. We've said teams look like they're going to go 0-3, 0-4, and then all of a sudden there's a quick turnaround. But next Monday looks like a stellar ask from to go into Buffalo and win that game. But just as touched on, it's not even a case of the offense is playing well, the defense is stuttering. It just seems to be on both sides of the ball. There's no cohesion whatsoever.
Shane, if we're talking about complementary football, special teams for special players, Harrison Butker saves the Chiefs again over the weekend. Patrick Mahomes, uncharacteristically careless with the football, although I will point out one of the 2 picks he threw, probably the most sensational catch I have ever seen from a defensive back. Let's not just limit it to that. Probably one of the most sensational catches I've ever seen. Cam Taylor-Britt, one hands the pick, Odell Beckham style. If you haven't seen it, that is one to check out on YouTube.
Yeah, one of the contenders of a cornerback sort of being like the NBA style sort of silhouette. The shape of his body to get that interception was incredible, and I can't really blame.
You know who the NBA silhouette was, trivia fans? Who's it based on?
Jerry Reed. Am I right in saying that?
Jerry West.
Jerry West. Sorry, Jerry Reed is the
late Jerry West.
He's the country singer.
Jerry Reed was Eastbound and Down.
Yeah, there we go.
Swinging little guitar man, Jerry Reed.
Yeah. I knew it was Jerry. But yeah, I mean, if we're looking at this Chiefs Bengals matchup, I mean, firstly with Patrick Mahomes, and I know that the stat sheet says he got 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I know one of those interceptions we can kind of sort of lay off as being a sort of freak of nature. But what I'm really concerned about from the Chiefs' point of view is this is an offense which is heavily reliant on the ability of his quarterback, heavily reliant on how creative its plays are. But yet Patrick Mahomes only threw 6 passes that went past the line of scrimmage. Now, one of those was a very deep ball which went to Rashee Rice for a touchdown in what was a crucial play. But considering that Isaiah Pacheco is now going to be sidelined for the next 6 to 8 weeks, a player who I think is becoming increasingly crucial to how Kansas City grind out and win these close games against rivals for AFC top seeds, like they were against the Ravens last week and like they were against the Bengals here. Something else needs to happen that Patrick Mahomes can feel more confident throwing the ball 10, 20 yards down the field. The fact that Patrick Mahomes is passing the ball only 6 times past the line of scrimmage, most of his passes are being thrown behind the line of scrimmage, that is not a good sign for him. It's not a good sign for football. And I think, again, it's that analytics-led approach where people are going with passes that have a high completion rate in order to try and get these kind of incremental gains. And I'm not fully convinced that it'll be explosive enough for the Chiefs to really build in late in the season. The good news for them, though, is the fact that they have managed to not only beat down the Ravens and the Bengals and make sure that both of those teams are now 0-2, which is a great leg up at this time of the season. I know a lot of people were, I guess, putting question marks over the officiating in the Chiefs, but I have to say, whoever was drawing up the scheduling for the Chiefs this year, that I think definitely did them a big favor by having 2 home games against the Ravens and the Bengals so early in the season. But I think this result is one that Cincinnati can come away with a lot of big takeaways that they can build on. And if these two meet up in the postseason again, as I expected they might, it will be it will be one for the ages. And I think that the Bengals showed themselves to be good enough to go and beat the Chiefs again, because they really should have done here.
Brian, a trope we saw in this game, called out by Fred Flunk, who's watching right now as at time of recording while we're streaming live. We saw Harrison Butker line up I think it was a 68-yard field goal attempt that Chiefs had no intention of kicking, because, if they'd missed it, they were potentially in a situation where it could have been very costly. There was no way they were going to give up that kind of field position. This seems to be happening more and more often, where coaches send out the field goal unit to kind of look like they're going to kick a field goal that they're never really going to attempt.
Same last week with the Cowboys. The Cowboys did it last week in a game. At that stage, the game was well and truly over, and they bring out the kicker, I suppose, to assess whether it's a realistic option. In the game yesterday, I can only put it down to the Bengals making an assumption, and then obviously they quickly run them off and punt it. But it wasn't even the case that was even what took place. Sometimes you see that situation, then they scramble off quickly, I suppose, to try catch them off guard. Maybe they go false start and they get an additional 5 yards. Didn't make any sense. I thought he might have made it, though. He's such an effective kicker in the league. We saw it in the Super Bowl, the longest Super Bowl kick in history. I wouldn't have been against rounds of possibility he made it, but in the nature of the game where it was at, it didn't make any sense. It's too risky. They would have put a player back there to return, and then you're into a completely different situation. If it's return for a touchdown or the Bengals get great position. I just want to touch on something else, Connor. Ja'Marr Chase, we spoke about it the other day. I read something today. Oh, why don't the Bengals just go and pay him? Well, they are trying to pay him. They've offered him $35 million. The guy doesn't want their money. The guy has said, no, I'm worthy of more. Jefferson's going off on 99-yard touchdowns. Jefferson on the receiver program comes across as a really down-to-earth guy who recognizes the talent that he has, but understands the nature of the game and what he's trying to do. He doesn't go and live in the big flash house. He said he doesn't need the house. Ja'Marr Chase had 5 targets yesterday for 4 receptions. It's not like he went off in a mad game yesterday. And more importantly, probably the biggest moment in the game for me, he gives away that silly penalty where they're backed up another 15 yards. Joe Burrow has to pull him out of the situation. Today, the Bengals are complaining about the refereeing. The refereeing have come out today and said it was an absolutely correct decision made by the referees. You can't go on with that behavior. The guy needs to buckle up, get his head down, and play the game effectively, because the Bengals right now are in a hole and they need their players to step up. And right now, he's not, because his head is turned from day one. He wasn't in the right position to play last week, and he didn't seem up for it yesterday in such a big game. And the Bengals need to win. And unfortunately for the Bengals, they've got Commanders on Monday night next year. Ironically, I think Monday night last year was when they got their first victory against the Rams, and they turned things around for a period of time. But it just doesn't seem like Zach Taylor's got control of the situation, or the GM has got control of the situation. Rant over.
Yeah, I thought all of that said, Kieran, and I take it under advisement, Bengals still should have won that game. They had it in their hands to do so.
Bengals will be furious. I mean, that was the game that they had. It was right there, and I'm putting that Chase kind of losing the head down to the whole contract situation. I think it's got to the stage now where he's mad at the team and he's just venting in any old direction. And the ref happened to catch it yesterday, but all is not well with the Bengals. We got the T. Higgins stuff too, but they still managed to almost beat another day, another set of refs. They might have got away with that call, but they should have won that game in all honesty. I mean, they're going to be kicking themselves. They were matching the Chiefs toe for toe. And, I'm going to equate the Chiefs right now to the 1996 Red Devils under Fergie. They'll do everything, and they'll be losing 2-0 with, 92nd minute. And they got Jesper Blomqvist and they got Duncan Ferguson, and they still managed to find a way. And that's the thing with the Chiefs. The Chiefs don't have any superstars. Rashee Rice is okay. But, they're talking about bringing Kareem Hunt in, but they just do enough, and they just get the rub of the green all the time. However, what I will say as well is the NFL gods are watching, and I think that call that went the Chiefs' way in week 2, there's going to be a call later on down the line that's going to go against the Chiefs, and that's the football gods and karma working its way out. But Bengals should have had that game. They're going to be kicking themselves. But the good thing is Burrow is back to Burrow-like. He was really good yesterday, 23-36. 260 yards and a couple of touchdowns. He looked more like the real Joe Burrow. Physical, aggressive. He was making first downs and banging his chest. Looking every bit the leader of a quarterback that he is. But they'll be desperately disappointed they didn't come away with a W there.
Brian?
I hope that doesn't happen, Kieran, for the sake of all of us, because you remember last year when they were lined up in the incorrect position and they had that fantastic play of the lateral pass from Kelsey to Tony, which went in for the touchdown against the Bills. And Mahomes said it should have been allowed because it was a fantastic play. Let's never mind the rules in this situation. Never mind the fact that your offensive line guy was in the wrong position. So, and the week that led to that, and Mahomes was ranting with Josh Allen after the game. Let's hope we don't have something similar in the season, because the Chiefs will find a way then to put the narrative in place. Come the playoffs, Connor, as you know well, everyone's against us, but they'll find a way to be in New Orleans come February.
Speaking of ending in New Orleans in February, I tell you who's sneaking away on that road, Shane, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, we talked about the Ravens finding themselves unexpectedly in an 0-2 hole. We've just talked about the Bengals, who, despite playing well, find themselves in an 0-2 hole. Browns haven't played well at all. They're probably blessed to even be at 500 right now. Meanwhile, the Steelers are just tiptoeing through the tulips at 2-0 and looking pretty good with it, with Justin Fields at quarterback.
It's classic Tomlin play, isn't it? Just be as boring as possible, but get the victory. And who cares? That is the way that it probably should be, especially if you are playing Pittsburgh Steelers football. I think there's a lot of question marks over the ability of the Steelers to score points. The fortunate thing for them is they've played against two teams with an even worse ability to score points, particularly this Denver Broncos team, where I think Bo Nix probably certainly is not the answer. But I mean, in fairness to the Steelers, they have trusted their strength, which is defense, and trusted, what to get at the quarterbacks. They've trusted their guys to not even bend, don't break, just be stifling, don't give room, don't even give the option. Make sure you have as many of the bases covered as possible, and just good game planning. We'll get onto it later. I think what bad game planning can do for other teams in AFC races, but. In fairness to the Steelers, whatever kind of defensive challenge they've had to put against, they've found a way to do it. They didn't need to score a touchdown to get past the Falcons, because they managed to keep Kirk Cousins quiet. In fairness, Kirk Cousins was coming off a season of injury. But you can't blame a team for just getting the basics right. We've spoken so much about teams which maybe do more exciting things, but when they get the basics wrong, they throw away games that they should win. We've talked about that with the two New York teams. We've talked about kind of with Detroit. So when you see a team that maybe isn't being exciting, but is getting the basics right, you can't really blame them. And in that regard, they have earned their 2-0 record.
Kieran, you talked a little bit earlier about Florida teams being in trouble. We didn't talk yet about the Dolphins, who, never mind the Dolphins being in a hole, it was genuinely troubling and upsetting for anyone watching that game to see Tua Tagovailoa take that hit and go down with yet another brain injury, particularly seeing that side of his arm. Fencing, I think, is the neurological term for it, where it goes out at an unnatural angle, which unfortunately is a signifier of the kind of concussion that he'd suffered. You hate to see it for him and for the team. It's a very, very difficult situation. It's hard to know how this gets resolved, because ultimately his safety and his health has to come first.
Yeah, and immediately after the game on Amazon Prime, you've got Tony Gonzalez and other guys saying that he should retire immediately. Getting those the first take, the hot takes, that's not helpful in a situation like this. And it's the harsh realities of football. And Josh Allen came out saying, he's rooting for him and he's hoping. It's a brotherhood. Nobody wants to see this stuff happen. It's a consequence of a physical game that uses its head a lot, and it's a really bad situation in Miami. We saw McDaniel putting his arm around him and giving him a hug and just showing that genuine warmth for a player who's in a real bad spot. And if it's still up in the air if he comes back. Do we want it? Do people even want to see him come back? Do we want to see him in that situation again where he's had so many concussions and it's almost not coincidental, but the fact that it was Damar Hamlin that was involved in the play as well. Yeah. That's such a bad thing, because now that's Hamlin's already gone through his own stuff, and now he's going to have to go through this as well, that he was involved in that play with Tua. And but putting the Tua stuff aside, as hard as it is, the Dolphins are in a real bad spot now, because I know they brought in Tyler Huntley, but they've again, they have two quarterbacks. Do they have any quarterbacks? And Tyreek Hill is going to need the ball early and often in any games if the Dolphins are going to keep up this dynamic offense. Do we think Tyler Huntley can keep up with that dynamic offense? Probably not. And the run game is not going to be enough for him, even if Shane and Mostert do have the wheels. So it's real tough, but it just shows you the margins in NFL and the dangers that lurk around every corner.
Brian, I wanted, before we wrap up on our week 2 talking points here, to talk about some of the rookies again, still at an early point of the season, of course, who've been showing out. Guy really stepped up over the weekend. I mean, he's good week 1 as well, and we didn't quite get to him in the show last week, but didn't want to leave the time go without getting to him this week. Brock Bowers had a hell of a game for the Raiders. They now absolutely have a double act there in Vegas. They're talking Siegfried and Roy right now because they are starstruck.
Yeah, the Ravens couldn't deal with him whatsoever. He was kind of, with the exception of Devontae Adams, he just became the lead guy in terms of just go to him and he'll exploit this Ravens defense. I think the last 4 drives was touchdown, field goal, and Ravens had 2 drives to put the game away, and they took only like 2.5 minutes off the clock. So it's an amazing comeback. But we are starting to see the effectiveness of these players. Like Brock Bowers was one of those top end of the draft that everyone felt he'd go to the Jets. And I think even on the night in question in Cork, you kind of noted how quickly the card was put in for him. It was like the most, can't believe he's there, we're taking him, let's not even have a conversation. He looks like he's such a marquee
He was a
player.
guy everyone was excited about. You know,
Yeah.
that they were talking about how he's effectively a WR1. He's not really a tight end at all. Like, he has the speed, he has the hands, he can do it all, and we're seeing that already, even 2 weeks into his career. As you said, look, you know, they're looking for him all the first half. Devontae Adams, I think, was 4 for 22 yards, 4 receptions for 22 yards in the first half. He then goes off for 88 further yards on 5 catches in the second half. Because you're going to turn your attention to Brock Bowers, don't forget about Tay Adams.
Gardner Minshew only had 8 incomplete passes in the entirety of the game. That's telling of the fact that, 1, he's got all these players now at his disposal, and 2, the Ravens defense under Zach Orr struggled throughout the course of the game, and he's on the lam today. He's getting slaughtered today. Is he the answer? Defense coordinator with the Ravens, but sometimes you got to just put your hands up and say we're going up against some super talent here. He's arguably Harrison's getting all the plaudits this weekend, and rightly so, but let's not sleep on Bowers. It was a fantastic performance. And the nature of a comeback. Not many people are going into Baltimore or winning games, but the Ravens have a tendency to give these leads away as well and lose games. Highest ratio in the league since 2021 of losing games going into the 4th quarter. That's kind of telling of the coaching.
With double-digit leads, it's not just losing games. They were all
10 plus,
up 10 plus points in all those situations. Yeah. And I remember us talking about it on the show last season, saying how do they end up in these positions for such a good team with so much talent on both sides of the ball. One final guy I wanted to mention before we go, Shane, is Joe Alt. Was on the show obviously before the season. We had a good interview with him at the Chargers. He's now PFF's top-rated offensive tackle. Chargers 2-0. They're running the ball well, to your point. J.K. Dobbins in particular having himself a time there, and Joe Alt has been a big part of that.
Yeah, no, it must be. Is it something with the way the Harbaugh maybe is to keep slapping all of his players 10 times in the front and 10 times in the back? He seems to get the most out of particularly these young talents. Look, fair play to Joe Alt. I think his performance was quite strong against a Panthers defense who I think are underrated by the fact that the team consistently find ways to disappoint all around. There was 2 difficult tasks for an offensive line to face in the first couple of games, and Joe Alt has shown himself to play quite well, and especially considering that the Chargers in that Harbaugh system is going to rely on that O-line to create spaces for the running game. It's going to be an important cog if the Chargers are really going to challenge in the AFC West this year.
All right, that is our week 2 talking points, and we're back with you on Thursday live, of course, for our picks. We'll have Thursday night football preview separately too, so keep an eye out for that, and plenty more content on your way ahead of week 3.